Are you ready to learn the shocking truth about the most hidden aspect of life in the 19th century? Spoiler alert, the reality will definitely horrify you. What actually happened behind the closed doors of luxurious mansions was radically different from the beautiful scenes we see in historical films. Today, we'll tear off the mask of nobility from this era and explore a topic that historians prefer to keep quiet about. Women of that time faced harsh, sometimes downright insane trials, living under the incredible pressure of strict social norms. A normal pregnancy back then turned into a real horror story. It was a time of strict isolation, barbaric medical practices, and constant fear for one's life. You can't even imagine the sacrifices they had to make. Be sure to watch this video all the way to the end, because the most interesting part is yet to come. You'll learn how an ordinary corset, something we consider just a piece of clothing, turned the months of waiting for a child into a deadly test of endurance. They definitely won't tell you this in history class. Pour yourself some tea, get comfortable, and let's begin.
What will I do now? I have the waist measure.
What if I told you that everything you believed about Victorian fashion is a lie? Women of that era didn't abandon their signature silhouettes even during the most critical months of their lives.
Would you care for some tea?
Society demanded that they completely conceal their condition from prying eyes at any cost. Ladies used intricate constructions of whalebone and heavy fabric to maintain a slender waist. The ideal image of a Victorian lady did not allow for any visible changes to the figure, even in the very late stages of pregnancy. The construction of the dresses included many layers of heavy fabric, concealing the true contours of the body. Voluminous crinolines and bustles created a visual illusion, diverting attention from the abdominal area. Dressmakers resorted to ingenious tricks, altering outfits using hidden pleats and additional drapery. A woman could attend the social gatherings, and those around her would have no idea of her condition. This visual deception required enormous effort and the constant wearing of incredibly heavy structures. The weight of the multi-layered skirts rested on the shoulders and waist, hindering every movement. To maintain the desired shape, steel hoops were sewn into the lower layers of the clothing.
Just a moment.
Wearing such an outfit required perfect posture and constant control over one's body. Ladies could not afford to relax for even a moment during visits or walks. Heavy fabrics like velvet and thick silk made these dresses unbearably stuffy during the warmer months. Wide shawls and heavy capes made of thick wool also helped conceal one's figure. These wardrobe items became an essential part of the everyday look for many months. Women skillfully draped the fabric around their shoulders, creating a voluminous silhouette for the upper body. The ability to wear a shawl was considered a special art, requiring long practice sessions in front of a mirror. This accessory helped maintain secrecy even during chance encounters with acquaintances on the street. Visits to the dressmaker became frequent, but took place under the strictest secrecy. The seamstresses would enter their clients' homes through the back door so as not to attract the neighbors' attention. Measurements were taken behind tightly drawn curtains in the farthest rooms of the house.
Just hurry, please.
The seamstresses created special expanding inserts that could be adjusted discreetly. Such clothing cost a fortune, so only wealthy families could afford a new wardrobe. The corset remained the main element of clothing, despite its obvious discomfort. There were special models with lacing on the sides, allowing the pressure to be loosened slightly. However, many women continued to wear the usual rigid corsets for fear of losing their figure. Steel boning dug into the body, preventing free breathing and movement. Doctors of the time often debated the dangers of such clothing, but fashion proved stronger than common sense. Doctors tried to develop softer alternatives, but they were not popular. Women feared society's judgment more than the physical discomfort of tight lacing. Appearing in public without a corset was considered the height of indecency and bad taste. Even at home, in the presence of servants, ladies were required to look impeccable and austere. This strict control over the body reflected the general level of pressure on women during that era. Many ladies preferred to completely avoid social engagements in the later stages of pregnancy. They locked themselves in their bedrooms, refusing to receive even close friends. The only visitors were female relatives and the attending physician. Such isolation often led to deep despondency and a feeling of utter loneliness. Huge mansions turned into gilded cages for their wealthy mistresses. On the rare occasions when they went for walks, the women chose the quietest park paths in the early morning hours. They traveled in closed carriages with tightly drawn curtains. Chauffeurs were given strict orders to choose deserted routes far from busy streets. A chance encounter with familiar gentlemen was considered a true disaster and a cause for gossip. Society demanded that this natural state remain an absolute secret until the very end. Victorian morality turned pregnancy into something shameful that required careful concealment. Women were forced to play the role of perfect porcelain dolls, ignoring their own comfort. Strict rules of etiquette left no room for naturalness or relaxation. It would be very interesting to hear your perspective on such strict appearance rules. What do you think about these rigid fashion standards? Please share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Here's what happens behind the closed doors of Victorian bedrooms. As soon as a woman's condition could no longer be hidden, a period of strict seclusion began. The expectant mother moved to a specially prepared room with tightly shut windows. Heavy velvet curtains blocked out sunlight even during the brightest hours of the day. The atmosphere in the room resembled a gloomy crypt more than a cozy home bedroom. Doctors of that era sincerely believed that fresh air and bright light could be harmful. Rooms were aired out extremely rarely for fear of dangerous drafts and street dust. A fire burned constantly in the bedroom, maintaining an incredibly high temperature. Stifling heat and dim light became the woman's constant companions for several long weeks. The smell of burning wood mingled with the scents of heavy perfumes and herbal infusions. The furniture in the room was covered with thick covers to prevent excessive dust accumulation. Additional thick rugs were laid on the floor to muffle any sound of footsteps. Mirrors were often covered with dark cloth, following ancient and rather strange superstitions. Silence in the house was maintained as a strict order for all servants. Any loud sound or knock on the door was considered a potential threat to the mistress's peace of mind. Visitors were admitted to this dark room extremely rarely and only with the doctor's permission. Guests were required to speak in hushed whispers and avoid discussing disturbing news. Conversations were limited to neutral topics such as the weather, embroidery, or books they had read. Husbands spent as little time as possible in such rooms, citing important business in their study. The woman remained alone with her thoughts, surrounded only by nurses and maids. The daily routine consisted of monotonous activities like knitting or reading light novels. Vigorous movement was strictly forbidden, so the ladies spent their days reclining on high pillows. Food was brought on special trays directly to their beds. The diet consisted of bland porridges, broths, and weak tea without sugar. Such monotony quickly became tiresome, but no one dared to disobey the doctor's orders. For entertainment, a reader was sometimes invited to recite poetry in a monotonous voice. The selection of literature was strictly controlled to avoid any exciting plots. Adventure novels and newspapers with news were removed from free access. An information vacuum was artificially created to maintain mental balance. The woman completely lost contact with the outside world for weeks on end. Preparing the room itself required enormous effort on the part of the numerous servants. Maids dusted daily with special solutions containing aromatic oils. Fireplace grates were polished to a shine, taking care not to make unnecessary noise. Only candles made of pure wax were used to avoid the unpleasant smell of burning. Every detail in the interior was designed to create an atmosphere of complete peace and stillness. Clothing from this period was characterized by its baggy fit and complete lack of elegance. Ladies wore loose-fitting cotton or flannel shirts with long sleeves. Over these, they wore warm hoods and woolen shawls to protect against even the slightest chill. Hair was usually hidden under simple bonnets without lace or ribbons. A woman's appearance during this period was as far removed as possible from the customary secular ideals. Doctors regularly visited the recluse, conducting long and often pointless examinations. They took her pulse, examined her tongue, and asked numerous questions about her well-being. The medical instruments of the time looked strange, but were of little practical use. Doctors drew profound conclusions based on the color of her face or the tone of her voice. The patient was required to follow any instructions, even the most absurd ones, without question. A prolonged stay in a stuffy, dark room had a negative effect on physical health. Lack of movement led to weakness, and the lack of light dampened the mood. Women often fell into a deep apathy, losing interest in what was happening around them. How much do you think such isolation affected the human mind? In the next chapter, you'll learn about the incredible diets doctors use to try to keep their patients' strength up. The secret that people pay thousands for lies in unique Victorian dietary systems. A pregnant woman's diet in the 19th century consisted of a set of highly contradictory rules. Doctors were convinced that every food consumed directly shaped the character of the future child. Hot spices were completely excluded from the menu, as they were considered a cause of nervous agitation. Even a pinch of black pepper could be grounds for a serious medical reprimand. The diet consisted mainly of dishes that would seem utterly tasteless today. Oatmeal cooked in water, boiled potatoes, and mashed white meat were the main dishes. It was believed that such bland foods soothed a woman's mind and body. Salt was used in microscopic amounts, which made the food completely unappetizing. Vegetables were subjected to prolonged heat treatment, turning into a shapeless, soft mass. Particular attention was paid to beverages, many of which were strictly prohibited. Strong black tea and coffee were considered dangerous stimulants that caused insomnia. Instead, ladies were offered warm water with a drop of lemon juice. Sometimes weak herbal infusions of chamomile or mint were permitted. Interestingly, some doctors strongly recommended drinking dark beer to boost energy. Fruits were considered a source of excess moisture in the body and were consumed with great caution. Raw apples or pears were completely excluded from the menu due to fears of indigestion. Only baked fruit in the form of puree without added sugar was permitted. Exotic foods like oranges or pineapples were considered too stimulating for the nervous system. The diet was extremely low in vitamins, which led to constant weakness and fatigue. There were many strange superstitions regarding the shape and color of the foods consumed. Women were forbidden from eating red berries for fear of developing skin blemishes. Unusually shaped root vegetables were also excluded from the menu due to absurd superstitions. The servants carefully sorted the vegetables in the kitchen, selecting only the perfect specimens. Any non-standard food caused panic among the older female relatives and nannies. Meat was served exclusively boiled, without the slightest trace of fat. Fried dishes were considered too heavy for the stomach and thought to provoke evil thoughts. Beef broth was simmered for several hours until the liquid was completely clear. Poultry was skinned and served in tiny portions on porcelain plates. Fish was allowed only very rarely, as the smell of seafood was considered offensive. Sweets were strictly forbidden throughout the entire period of waiting. Chocolate, marzipan, and rich pastries were removed from the home or locked away. Doctors believed that sugar spoiled one's character and made a woman too capricious. The only treat allowed was a small piece of dry biscuit once a week. Ladies often craved sweets but were afraid to break the strict doctor's orders. Meal times were scheduled down to the minute, and deviations from the schedule were not permitted. Meals were taken strictly on schedule, regardless of whether one felt hungry. Dinner was always as light as possible and took place well before bedtime. Nighttime snacks were considered a sign of weakness and were strictly prohibited by the nurses. The stomach was constantly in a state of semi-emptiness, which added to the physical discomfort. Doctors often prescribed special fortifying mixtures of dubious composition. These liquids had a pungent odor and a repulsive bitter taste. Their ingredients could include ground chalk, charcoal, and various root extracts. Taking such medicines became a daily ordeal for the patient. It was impossible to refuse the mixture, as this was considered a violation of the regimen. A Victorian lady's diet was not aimed at maintaining strength, but at adhering to rules. Food was stripped of all flavor, turning into a tedious medical necessity. The restrictions were so severe that many women lost their appetite completely. Culinary pleasures only returned to their lives after a long time. If you found it interesting to learn about such strict gastronomic rules, don't forget to like this video. Something you've never seen before took place during routine medical consultations. Victorian morality dictated completely unthinkable rules for interaction between doctor and patient.
I understand.
The doctor was strictly forbidden from looking at a woman's body during an examination. The room was always dimly lit, and the patient was covered with several thick sheets. Visual contact between a male doctor and a lady was considered a gross violation of all norms of decency.
All right, you're safe here.
The examination was conducted exclusively by touch, under the cover of heavy woolen fabric. The doctor had to look at the ceiling or toward the window while slipping his hands under the blanket. This procedure was extremely awkward for both the specialist and the woman herself. Because of such restrictions, doctors often missed important symptoms and drew incorrect conclusions. The accuracy of diagnosis under such conditions was virtually zero. The advent of the stethoscope made auscultation a little easier, but created new obstacles. The instrument consisted of a long wooden tube that was placed against the patient through several layers of clothing.
Yes, doctor.
The doctor pressed his ear to one end of the tube, trying to catch sounds through the corset and chemise. The effectiveness of this method left much to be desired, turning the process into a formality. Doctors put on a knowing look while jotting down completely uninformative data in their notebooks. Discussions of symptoms were conducted using complex metaphors and allegories.
Oh, doctor.
Calling body parts by their proper names was absolutely unacceptable in decent society. Women blushed as they tried to describe how they felt using hints and vague phrases. The doctor had to decipher these verbal puzzles, relying on his limited experience. Often, they didn't understand each other at all, which led to the prescription of absurd treatments. Male doctors completely displaced traditional midwives from the homes of high society. The presence of a licensed doctor was considered a sign of a family's high social status. However, these respectable gentlemen in frock coats had very little practical experience. They studied theory from old books, never having observed real processes. Old, experienced nurses often knew more, but their opinions were completely ignored. To maintain their authority, doctors wrote out a huge number of prescriptions. The bedside tables in patients' bedrooms were filled with rows of vials containing dark liquids. The composition of these concoctions often remained a trade secret of the pharmacist and the doctor himself. Some mixtures contained dubious herbs that caused severe drowsiness. The women obediently swallowed these concoctions, firmly believing in the authority of the medical luminary. The doctor's visit was treated as an important and solemn event for the entire household. The servants scrubbed the floors and lined up in the hall to greet the distinguished guest. The doctor would wash his hands at length in a special porcelain basin, with rose water added. After a brief visual examination, he would go to the husband's study for a serious conversation. The patient herself was rarely told any details about her own condition. Victorian medicine was shackled by false modesty and social prejudices. Doctors played the role of wise mentors, unable to perform their work properly. Can you imagine how difficult it was to get real help under such conditions? In the next chapter, you will learn why society demanded that women isolate themselves completely and give up their normal lives. For a Victorian lady, the transition to this new state meant a complete change in social status. From an active participant in balls and receptions, she became an invisible shadow in her own home. The rules of etiquette strictly regulated her social circle and topics of conversation. Visits to theaters, exhibitions, and crowded dinner parties ceased entirely. A woman's world shrank to the size of a few rooms and a narrow circle of close relatives. Friends who had not experienced similar circumstances stopped visiting. It was considered improper to discuss such delicate matters with unmarried young women. Her social circle was limited to older ladies who constantly offered anxious advice. These conversations often boiled down to recounting various family stories with tragic endings. Such interactions brought no joy, but only intensified her inner anxiety and fear. Loneliness became the hardest trial of those long months of seclusion. The days dragged on slowly, filled with monotonous activities and strict doctor's orders. Reading letters from acquaintances was the only thread connecting a woman to the outside world. Replies to these letters were written in terse phrases, without mentioning the true state of affairs. Maintaining the illusion of a normal life was incredibly difficult and exhausting. Husbands often distanced themselves during this period, spending more time in gentlemen's clubs. Victorian society believed that a gentleman should not delve into women's problems. The husband played the role of a detached observer, paying the bills for doctors and servants. Emotional support from a husband was extremely rare in those strict times. Women grew accustomed to bearing all hardships entirely on their own. The lack of information gave rise to many unfounded fears and inner turmoil. Ladies had no access to scientific literature and did not understand the processes taking place within them. Their only source of knowledge was the vague hints of doctors and snippets of conversation from their elders. The unknown was far more frightening than the actual physical discomfort. Every new sensation caused panic and the expectation of the worst possible outcome. The entire atmosphere in the house was steeped in anticipation and constant tension. The servants moved silently, trying not to catch the mistress's eye unnecessarily. Any laughter or loud conversation was strictly suppressed by the housekeeper on the ground floor. The silence weighed heavily on the psyche, turning the huge mansion into a sort of silent fortress. It seemed to the woman that life around her had come to a complete standstill. To combat their despondency, the ladies engaged in the endless embroidery of minute details. They embroidered monograms on hundreds of napkins, handkerchiefs, and pieces of bed linens. This monotonous task strained their eyes immensely in the dim light of the room. Yet it was precisely this needlework that allowed them to pass the interminably long hours in some small measure. Needle and thread became their main allies in the fight against oppressive boredom.
Would you like a drink, dear?
In the evenings, the situation was made worse by the dim lighting and the eerie shadows cast by the candles. The women often suffered from insomnia, listening intently to every rustle in the old house. Doctors refused to prescribe sleeping pills, considering natural sleep a prerequisite. Sleepless nights wore down the nervous system, making the ladies tearful and irritable. By morning, they felt completely exhausted and drained of all strength. The lack of fresh air and physical activity led to frequent fainting spells. Doctors viewed these episodes of weakness as a normal manifestation of female nature. Vials of pungent salts were held to their noses to revive the patient. No measures were taken to improve their overall condition due to strict rules. Weakness was considered a sign of aristocracy and refinement. The psychological pressure of Victorian traditions broke the will of even the strongest women. They were forced to suppress their emotions, fears, and natural desires. Isolation turned into a veritable torture of silence, darkness, and complete inactivity. This invisible cage was created by a society that valued outward propriety above comfort. Under such conditions, the waiting period became the most difficult time in any lady's life. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the design of special undergarments. Despite their seclusion, women continued to pay enormous attention to their appearance. An entire industry of special garments emerged, designed to minimize any changes to the silhouette. Corset manufacturers competed to create complex designs with hidden mechanisms. These items cost a fortune and were ordered from catalogs in Paris or London. The special corset had numerous side laces and elastic rubber inserts. It allowed the waist to expand gradually while maintaining a rigid support for the back. Metal plates distributed the weight of heavy skirts, preventing them from pressing on the waist. It took a maid at least half an hour every morning to put on such a device. Removing it without assistance was an absolutely impossible task. Advertisements in magazines of the time promised ladies the complete preservation of perfect posture. Articles claimed that the right corset was the key to health and excellent well-being. In reality, these rigid shells squeezed the ribs and hindered normal breathing. Women could not take a deep breath, which is why their voices were always soft. The beauty industry dictated its harsh rules, ignoring the actual physical harm. Underwear consisted of multiple layers of fine cotton and batiste. Pantalons, chemises, and petticoats were lavishly adorned with handmade lace. It was believed that even clothing invisible to the eye had to be impeccably beautiful and expensive. Washing and ironing these delicate items required a tremendous amount of labor from laundresses. The lace was starched until it crunched, which created additional discomfort when worn. House dresses were made of soft fabrics, but featured intricate multi-layered collars. The abundance of ruffles and frills at the top drew attention away from other areas. Dark colors, such as burgundy, deep blue, and black, dominated the wardrobe. Light shades were considered impractical and too attention-grabbing. The silhouette of the dress was built on contrasts and volume, creating a visual illusion of fragility. Footwear also underwent changes due to frequent problems with swollen feet. Elegant leather-heeled boots were replaced by soft fabric shoes with flat soles. They often had no fastenings so that a woman would not have to bend over. Knitted leg warmers were worn over the shoes to protect against cold drafts in the house. These soft house slippers were richly embroidered with beads and silk threads. Hairstyles became simpler, as sitting in front of the mirror for long periods was tiring. Elaborate chignon styles gave way to hair that was smoothly combed back and gathered in a net. Maids combed their mistress's hair daily with natural bristle brushes 100 times. This was considered a beneficial massage, calming the nerves and relieving tension. The lack of elaborate hairstyles was compensated for by the use of beautiful bonnets with ribbons. Jewelry was rarely worn during this period, with the exception of wedding rings and simple earrings. Heavy necklaces and bracelets seemed too cumbersome and a hindrance to relaxation. Some ladies wore special lockets containing miniature portraits of their husbands. This symbolized devotion to the family and submission to the strict rules of Victorian marriage. Jewelry was kept in boxes until its triumphant return to society. All this fashionable attire created the image of a fragile, almost ethereal fairy in need of protection. Victorians valued delicacy, considering it the hallmark of a true aristocrat. Clothing shaped not only a woman's silhouette, but also her very manner of behavior. The stiffness of movement dictated a slow gait, graceful gestures, and soft speech. The wardrobe became a tool for controlling the body and the mind. The 19th century fashion industry transformed a natural process into a display of status. Women wore kilograms of fabric and steel to conform to absurd ideals. Each dress was a masterpiece of tailoring and, at the same time, an instrument of torture. No one dared to challenge the established canons of beauty and propriety. Do you think they could have broken these rules without losing their reputation? In the next chapter, you'll learn why women spent hours sewing. Sewing for hours on end was not merely a pastime, but a vital ritual of the Victorian era. Preparing a vast quantity of items began long before the anticipated event. Tradition demanded the creation of colossal stockpiles of linens, clothing, and household items. Every woman in the house, including younger sisters and maids, was enlisted in this process. Rooms were transformed into veritable sewing workshops, piled high with rolls of snow-white fabric. Fabrics were purchased in bulk, with preference given to the finest Irish linen and cotton. Every piece was cut by hand with incredible precision and care. The use of sewing machines was just beginning to come into fashion, so most of the stitching was done by hand. The seamstresses competed to create the tiniest stitches, which were practically invisible to the eye. This work required perfect eyesight and tremendous patience from everyone involved in the process. An essential part of the preparation was creating long lace ribbons and intricate edgings. The lace was woven on special bobbins, creating intricate floral patterns. These ribbons were subsequently used to decorate literally every item, from shirts to pillowcases. The snow-white color symbolized purity, wealth, and the family's high standing in society. Working with lace was considered a refined pastime, worthy of a true lady. While sewing together, the women engaged in quiet conversation, discussing the finer points of household management. It was a unique way of passing down experience from the older generation to the younger. Young girls were taught the rules of managing servants and keeping ledgers. Controversial social issues or politics were never discussed in such women's circles. The atmosphere was filled with calm, the monotonous rustle of fabric, and the clinking of scissors. The sheer number of items produced boggled the minds of modern researchers. The lists included dozens of identical shirts, bonnets, blankets, and soft towels. Victorians believed that a vast stockpile of such items demonstrated a family's reliability and prosperity. Laundry in those days was a complicated process, so a great many clean items were required. Wardrobes were bursting with starched linens tied with silk ribbons. An important part of the work was embroidering the family monogram on each item. The monograms were designed in advance, intertwining the initials into a complex heraldic pattern. Smooth silk threads were used for the embroidery, which shimmered against the matte background of the linen. Each letter had to be perfectly even, without a single knot on the reverse side. This delicate work was entrusted only to the most experienced and meticulous embroiderers in the household. Men never interfered in the preparation process, considering it exclusively women's work. They merely paid the enormous bills from fabric and haberdashery shops without fail. The head of the household might never have seen the results of this months-long labor. The division of responsibilities was so strict that any overlap of spheres of influence was impossible. The sewing room became a sort of women's club, closed to outsiders. In addition to clothing, they sewed special heavy curtains, canopies, and chair covers. The bedroom's interior was to be completely redecorated by a certain date. Expensive, heavy fabrics capable of shielding against drafts and sunlight were used. Draping the room took several days of work by the city's finest upholsterers. All these efforts were aimed at creating a perfect, sheltered space. Once everything was ready, the items were carefully washed, starched, and ironed with heavy irons. Sachets of dried lavender were placed in the dressers to give the linens a pleasant scent. Each stack was separated by thin tissue paper to prevent the fabric from yellowing. The process of packing items into drawers became a solemn and rigorous ritual. Maids spent hours aligning the edges of towels and napkins with a ruler. Preparing the dowry was not only a practical necessity, but also a way to calm the nerves. Monotonous manual labor helped women distract themselves from anxious thoughts and fears. The creative process gave a sense of control over the situation in a world of strict limitations. Huge stacks of finished linens served as visible proof of a duty fulfilled. This tradition united women, creating an illusion of safety and domestic comfort. The Victorian era was a time when the most incredible superstitions and omens flourished. People believed that every action a woman took left an invisible mark on her future. Taboos applied to literally everything, from the direction of one's gaze to the way one tied one's shoelaces. Scientific knowledge could not yet explain many processes, so mysticism took its place. A lady's life turned into an endless game governed by the rules of absurd old superstitions. One of the main prohibitions was a strict instruction not to look at frightening things. It was believed that the sight of fire, poverty, or physical defects could lead to misfortune. During walks, coachmen would deliberately avoid areas where hospitals or factories were located. Ladies were advised to look only at beautiful paintings, statues, and blooming gardens. An aesthetically pleasing environment was considered the key factor in creating an ideal life. There were strict rules regarding the use of various household items. One was not allowed to step over ropes or wires lying on the floor of the room. It was forbidden to raise one's hands high above one's head to reach a book on the top shelf. The maids made sure that the mistress did not sit with her legs crossed, even when alone. Any violation of these rules caused panic among the senior servants and female relatives. Encountering certain animals on the street was interpreted as a bad or good omen. Seeing a hare was considered a sign of great misfortune, while encountering a sheep promised peace of mind. Birds tapping on the window caused a full-blown panic and an immediate call for a doctor. To avoid such encounters, windows were kept tightly shut and walks were kept to a minimum. To the Victorians, the world outside the mansion seemed full of hidden threats and secret symbols. Particular importance was attached to the phases of the moon and the arrangement of the stars in the night sky. Certain treatments and the administration of potions were strictly scheduled for the waxing moon. Moonlight was considered dangerous, so at night, gaps in the curtains were tightly covered with towels. It was recommended to sleep with one's head facing north so that the Earth's currents would flow in the correct direction. Astrological calendars often sat on bedside tables next to medical reference books. Mirrors in the house held a special mystical danger, according to the Victorians. Staring at one's reflection for too long was strictly forbidden, lest one lose one's vital energy. If a mirror happened to break, it was considered a harbinger of imminent disaster. The shards were immediately gathered by servants and buried in the farthest corner of the garden. Mirrored surfaces were often draped with tulle to mitigate their supposedly harmful effects. There were strange superstitions associated with food and table settings in the dining room. Spilling salt was a bad omen, requiring immediate protective rituals. Passing a knife from hand to hand during dinner was strictly forbidden by the rules. If a fork fell, it meant an unpleasant visitor would soon arrive at the house. Everyday life was entangled in a web of these minor but strict prohibitions. Clothing was also subject to mystical analysis by the older women in the family. A shirt accidentally worn inside out was considered an excellent sign, promising incredible luck. It was forbidden to sew clothes while wearing them, so as not to corrupt one's own mind. Losing a button was regarded as a minor nuisance requiring immediate correction. Threads left on a dress after sewing were carefully removed and burned in the fireplace. Doctors often shared these superstitions, adding pseudo-scientific justifications to them. They forbade women from thinking deeply, believing that active brain work was harmful. Reading serious literature was equated with dangerous physical labor in a factory. Doctors advised keeping the mind in a state of complete rest and pleasant emptiness. Intellectual activity was considered an exclusively male prerogative, dangerous for delicate ladies. An abundance of superstitions created an atmosphere of constant anxiety and the expectation that fate was plotting against them. Women lived in fear of taking a wrong step or breaking an unseen rule. This system of prohibitions helped society control every move a lady made. Mysticism replaced common sense, turning everyday life into a series of rituals. Overcoming this barrier of prejudice was practically impossible in the realities of the 19th century. In Victorian society, there was an impenetrable division between the male and female spheres of life. The gentleman completely controlled the outside world, finances, politics, and business. The woman reigned supreme within the home, managing the servants and household affairs. These two worlds intersected only at the dinner table and during formal receptions. The period of waiting made this boundary between spouses even more rigid and insurmountable. It was considered improper for men to show excessive interest in their wife's physical condition. They never attended doctor's visits and did not discuss medical details. The head of the household received all reports on his wife's health from the head housekeeper or nurse. Conversations between husband and wife on these topics were limited to perfunctory, polite phrases. The display of strong emotions on the part of the man was regarded as a sign of weakness and a loss of dignity. While his wife was confined to the home, the husband continued to lead an active social and business life. He attended clubs, dined with business partners, and went hunting with friends. Society did not require him to change his usual schedule or cancel important visits. The household continued to function like a well-oiled machine, without distracting the master from his affairs. The entire burden of the situation fell exclusively on the shoulders of the woman and her servants. If shopping was necessary, the husband simply signed the presented receipts. He did not delve into the cost of fabrics, the number of sheets ordered, or doctor's fees. The financial side of matters was settled quickly and without unnecessary discussion in his study. The man served as an impersonal source of funds to support the household. Victorian morality shielded gentlemen from any domestic inconveniences or anxieties. The library and smoking room became the man's main stronghold within his own home. Maids were not allowed in, and cleaning was performed exclusively by a special footman. The sounds of bustle and the anxious conversations of the women of the mansion did not penetrate these rooms. The husband could spend hours reading newspapers or discussing politics with invited guests. It was a safe space, completely isolated from family concerns. On the rare occasions when he visited his wife's room, the husband behaved with extreme restraint and detachment. He might sit in an armchair for 15 minutes, discussing the weather or news from the papers. Holding his wife's hand or showing affection in the presence of the maids was unthinkable. Strict etiquette dictated its rules even in the most intimate family moments. After a brief visit, the gentleman would return to his usual affairs with relief. Fathers of the Victorian era often viewed events exclusively through the lens of inheritance. Their primary concern was the continuation of the family line and the transfer of the family fortune. An emotional connection with the next generation was virtually non-existent at this stage. Men thought in terms of contracts, titles, and preserving the family status. Their wives' personal feelings remained an incomprehensible and distant mystery to them. Such alienation often led to a cooling of relations between spouses for many years. Women harbored resentment over this indifference, hiding it behind a mask of submission and politeness. Men genuinely did not understand the reasons for this discontent, believing they were fulfilling their duty to the fullest. This wall of misunderstanding was erected by society itself with its rigid standards. Marriage often turned into a formal partnership between two complete strangers. In working-class families, the situation was different, as poverty did not allow for a division of spheres of influence. Husbands from the lower classes often helped their wives by doing heavy physical labor. However, in high society, such displays of care were considered an unthinkable loss of status. An aristocrat could not bring himself to fetch a glass of water or adjust a pillow. For these purposes, there was a vast staff of well-trained and discreet servants. Victorian patriarchy relieved men of emotional involvement in family difficulties. They were shielded from pain, fears, and anxieties by thick walls of social conventions. Women bore this burden alone, maintaining a perfect facade for those around them. The division of the world into male and female reached its peak during these long months. It was a time of trial in which no roles were assigned to gentlemen. In the mid-19th century, medical science began to take tentative steps forward. The discovery of anesthesia was a true breakthrough that changed the understanding of physical suffering. The use of ether and chloroform opened a new chapter in human history. At first, these substances were used only during complex surgical procedures in hospitals. But gradually, progressive doctors began to introduce these innovations into the home practices of wealthy families. For a long time, society fiercely resisted the use of painkillers. Conservative moralists argued that overcoming hardship was a woman's highest calling. Religious leaders published treatises condemning any attempts to alleviate physical suffering. Old-school doctors were afraid to use unknown gases, fearing unpredictable consequences. Progress was making its way through a thick wall of prejudice and outright ignorance. The situation changed dramatically when Queen Victoria herself decided to use chloroform. Her decision caused a sensation in London's high society. The Queen's authority was so unquestionable that all critics fell silent immediately. Anesthesia instantly became fashionable, a sign of progressiveness and high status. The best doctors began actively offering this service to their wealthiest female clients. The procedure was given the poetic name twilight sleep, which concealed its true nature. The patient was given chloroform vapors to inhale through a special cloth mask. The woman sank into a state of deep unconsciousness, losing touch with reality. She could not control the process, being completely at the mercy of the medical staff. This state seemed like a salvation, though it harbored many hidden dangers. Doctors determined the gas dosage practically by guesswork, relying on intuition. No precise instruments for measuring the concentration of the substance existed at the time. The doctor simply dripped the liquid onto the cloth, observing the reaction of the sleeping patient. Errors in dosage led to serious complications and respiratory arrest. However, the fear of the unknown was so strong that women willingly took this risk. The twilight sleep state erased memories of the last few hours spent in the room. Upon waking, the woman often did not understand what had happened or how much time had passed. Doctors considered this memory loss the main advantage of the new method. The absence of distressing memories supposedly preserved the lady's fragile nervous system. It was the ideal solution for a society eager to conceal and gloss over everything. The use of chloroform required the presence of several qualified specialists in the home. The procedure cost a fortune, so it was accessible only to a narrow segment of the aristocracy. Poor women continued to rely on traditional methods and the help of experienced midwives. The social divide in healthcare became even more evident. Progress served only those who could pay its high cost in gold guineas. With the advent of anesthesia, the doctor's role in the process became absolutely dominant. Male doctors finally relegated female nurses to the position of mere assistants. Now the doctor managed the patient's condition, making all key decisions alone. This strengthened the male medical community's control over women's health. The patient became a passive object of manipulation, deprived of a voice. Despite the risks, the use of chloroform marked the first step toward the humanization of medicine. It proved that physical suffering is not an inevitable part of human existence. Science began to gradually overcome age-old prejudices and religious dogmas. Advances in chemistry and pharmacology opened up new horizons for research. The 19th century laid the foundation for the entire modern healthcare system. The Victorian era was coming to an end, taking with it many cruel traditions and rules. Heavy corsets, dark rooms, and superstitions were slowly giving way to a scientific approach. Women had come a long way from silent recluses to patients in modern clinics. This story shows how much the world has changed thanks to the courage of innovators and progress. The darkness of Victorian bedrooms has faded, leaving us only the yellowed pages of old medical books. The history of the Victorian era still holds many surprising and frightening secrets. Life behind the facades of beautiful mansions was full of harsh trials and strict restrictions that were not spoken of openly. We learned how fashion, medicine, and prejudice turned everyday things into a real test of endurance. Understanding the past helps us appreciate just how much our modern world has changed for the better. Let us know in the comments what other aspects of 19th century life you'd like to see in our next videos. Perhaps you're interested in the history of antique medical instruments or the secrets behind Victorian kitchens. We always listen to your ideas and create content based on your suggestions. Your comments help the channel grow and find the most fascinating topics to explore. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon so you don't miss any new exciting videos. Thank you for watching until the end, and see you in our next historical adventures.